Radical Radio Collective.
4ZZZ. Good afternoon, listeners. You are tuned into 4ZZZ on 102.1 FM, and this is Eco Radio, Australia's longest-running peace and environment radio show. Taking over your middle of the day in the middle of your week airwaves. We are in the first week of February.
Finally, February. I don't know about you guys, but that felt like the longest January. That was like a whole year.
Yeah. I mean, the news was interesting a lot of the time during it, so that probably contributed to
a few things.
Yeah.
But yes.
To the speed of January. Mm-hmm. Also, we've had it confirmed I got it from Wave and Andrew that Eco Radio has been going since at least the 80s.
Whoa.
Yeah.
We're old.
Yeah, that's older than me.
That is older than me as well.
Yeah,
that's
crazy that. My name is Zack and my pronouns are he, they, and I'm joined by
Issy, pronouns she, they.
And I want to start off by acknowledging and paying my respects to the custodians of the country on which we broadcast. We are located in the city Magangin on Turrbal Indooroopilly land. I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are listening in today. Our radio waves reach Kabi Kabi and Jinnabara country in the north, Waka Waka country in the west. In the east, we pay our respects to the Quanda Mooka people, and down south, we reach Commonberry, Nagaragwal, Munanjali, Wanjirabara and Yugambear countries. There is no Crown land. What do we have planned for today, Izzy?
Today is, we've got a theme, an event today. If you cast your minds back to nearly about a year ago, we spoke to an organisation called Sweltering Cities, which was doing a big heat survey. And today is their first ever Extreme Heat Awareness Day. So everything that we're going to talk about is all heat related, things that you can do for your community, things that you can do for yourself. We'll be talking a little bit of science as well and how it affects our animals and us as humans.
So you're telling me subscribing to 4ZZZ didn't give you enough warm inner glow? Here's the thing, you could be like Ian. Ian subscribed to his business and chucked a $50 donation on top of that. Be an Ian and head to 4ZZZ.org.au to subscribe and donate today. Sounds like a good plan to me.
What are we talking about next, Izzy?
I am going to talk a little bit about some science. So, for those who missed the intro, we are talking all things extreme heat.
Hold up.
Whoa.
Is this too much cross-pollination between Eco Radio and No Idea?
Well, it has an eco twist to it.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
So, I am going to be talking about a recent article that has come out, in December, article about the hairpin banksia, a specific type of banksia that grows in forests in Victoria. And this study looked at how vulnerable it was to extinction in areas where bushfires occur more frequently. This was published in the Australian Journal of Botany in collaboration with the Victorian government.
Can I guess the QS ranking on this?
Oh, I have to. There's no... yeah.
It's not a university.
No.
That's silly me. I zoned out for a second.
Did you want to?
No, it's okay.
It is a government department, I'm afraid. So any answer would have been correct.
Equal last.
These banksias are woody fruits that are opened by the heat of fire to release seeds, but those seeds need to grow into plants old enough to produce their own fruits and seeds before the next fire. So obviously there needs to be some degree of grace period between them opening and releasing the seeds and those seeds coming to fruition. Researchers examined 25 sites across Victoria that burned during the Black Saturday fires in 2019 and 2020 and found that the seedlings of the hairpin banksia were only found in sites where the plants were at least 12 years or older at the time of the fires. The plants that grew after the Black Saturday fires were not expected to produce their own fruits and seeds for at least a decade, so until the early 2030s. And researchers say if fire returns in the next decade, the remaining population of the hairpin banksia would be under threat. So this is another example of kind of the smaller things that you may not consider in bushfire seasons and things like that. Obviously, the 2019-2020 bushfires were quite an extreme example, but it is very interesting to kind of wrap your head around how much heat affects nature, and whether it's as something as small as these plants opening during fire and then not being able to come to fruition. It's very interesting to see how it's all kind of connected. So they are hoping to examine how to restrict the amount of the potential for bushfires in those very vulnerable forests, and just kind of limiting the amount of frequent and severe wildfires. So yeah, that's my little plant science.
Did you have anything else on top of that?
I did. I also had I'm on a roll with the depressing news, I'll be honest.
Yeah,
sorry guys.
that's okay.
It's kind of hard to talk about it without not coming through. They found this was a paper published in Nature Medicine about how temperature-related deaths in European cities could increase up to 50% by the end of the century if we fail to tackle climate change. I think it's interesting looking at European cities as well. Whilst it is quite Eurocentric, of course, they are it is an interesting way to contrast populations that may have similar socioeconomic backgrounds to see how they deal with climate change. It's also important to acknowledge that majority of the time people in developing countries are affected the worst when it comes to climate change, so it's important to keep them in mind. But in this study, the researchers found that based on climate simulation based on data on 854 urban areas across 30 European countries, they used it to estimate deaths from very cold and very hot temperatures, with increased deaths from extreme heat outpacing decreases in death from extreme cold. Strong climate mitigation measures could reduce the number of additional deaths. And it's important when talking about climate mitigation as well, it isn't like prevention, where it's trying to stop it. It is about simply mitigating the damage. So right now, as we kind of may throw around some stats about us tipping over the 1.5 degree limit, it's now less prevention and more mitigation. So it is quite scary, and it is quite a hard conversation, but I think it is an important one, especially as we start inching further and further forward towards that. We'll keep going towards that tipping point, but we still have time.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have days like this where we are aware, and emphasizing human connection as well, because I think the best thing that we can do as people is talk to other people and check in.
Yeah, I think regarding to the specific, the European element of that, lots of their houses are built to contain heat rather than, be cool. And obviously in Australia, a lot more of our houses are designed to keep cool rather than to maintain heat. So with a lot of those older buildings, they're going to be disproportionately affected over there by increases in temperature. And
it's things that, I remember when they had the heat wave of 27 degrees in the UK, and that no one understood heat stroke symptoms and things like that. So now it's these areas that really shouldn't have to learn what the opposite heat temperature affects them. They now have to learn those signs and symptoms because it is just becoming so common, or it will become an event that will happen every year. It's pretty wild. I
think as well, I want to bring this up while we're sort of discussing how fire and heat can impact the climate or our nature further. So there's this frog called the striped burrowing frog, which is located in southeast Queensland along much of the east coast. This is a frog that during drier months it will bury underground and build its a little cocoon out of mucus and other bodily fluids, and it maintains there for 7 months, kind of several months, waiting for more favourable conditions to emerge. So when the rains come again, that's when they start emerging. But obviously, as things like heat waves and potentially even it starts raining less, they're going to be around less and less. They're not going to be emerging from their little cocoon. An interesting thing. Those frogs are super interesting as well, because even though they're inactive for several months, they actually found that there's no the muscle doesn't waste away in their legs at all, even though they aren't being used. It's super interesting. I think there were some of the scientists were looking at using that for potential
muscle atrophy.
Muscle atrophy, from coma, or I don't know what the
just recovery,
in recovery. So there's something potentially useful there. Cool little
really
frog.
Cool, nice.
Yeah,
I've just pulled up from the World Bank that, with in regards to talking about how climate change disproportionately affects people in developing countries. They stated that only 1/10 of the world's greenhouse gases are emitted by 74 lowest income countries, but they are most likely to be affected by climate change. And I'm pretty sure there has been numerous cases of legal action from, I'm trying to think which country.
It's Tuvalu or the Solomon Islands?
Yeah, where they put legal action towards, was it countries that had affected them? I feel silly jumping on air and not being 100% sure.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I can't remember the specifics of it though.
But I think it is really important, because as much as we can reuse, reduce, get solar energy, blah blah blah, for some people this is real, and for some people it is something that is also heavily tied into their spirituality as well. A lot of indigenous cultures are tied into nature, so if their islands are obviously going underwater, that is losing a major pillar of their culture. Have you got it, Zack?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
So this was Tuvalu, who's it's a very low sitting country. There's not much land with it at all. It has decided to sue corporations in the United States and Australia that produce greenhouse gases, the cause of global warming. That was from the 24th of May last year.
And don't forget as well, there are numerous campaigns going around alongside Sweltering Cities. One that immediately comes to mind is Our Islands, Our Home, which is a campaign led by Torres Strait Islanders to protect their island homes. And I think it is so essential now that people are going through legal routes, really kind of fighting back. Okay. Yeah, I think there is always hope in regards to this conversation. It is really easy to get bogged down about the stats about it. So I think the best thing that you can do is be part of your community. We've put up on Eco Radio on the Instagram a few infographics given to us by Sweltering Cities, and one of them includes how isolation can play a big role in how people get affected by heat. So if you can, pull up your phones if you're listening to us, and text a older relative or someone who you may not be entirely familiar with, and check in with them, because they tend to be the most affected, whether even if it's a friend or whether it's even pets and animals around the neighborhood as well. We had that PDA play earlier about taking care of your pets. So my dog's got a bowl inside and outside. I always leave bowls out for general animals around my local park. So if the biggest thing is to get out into the community. I find that it's so easy to get stuck and bogged down with stats and figures and science. And whilst it does play a role in the parts that are true, it also is important to get out into your community, to support groups that have the capacity to be headstrong and go forth with either legal actions or protests or rallies and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's my big rant.
Thank you.
It is Extreme Heat Awareness Day, created by Sweltering Cities in sponsorship as well with Red Cross Australia, so keeping health in mind. But I think something that you should also keep in mind is also subscribing as well. If you want to have a nice, tender, warm inner glow, not too hot, nothing that will cause damage, subscribe to 4ZZZ. We are both volunteers here, if you can tell. We make the playlist, we make the content, and we are lucky enough to do so because of subscribers. So if you want to head to 4ZZZ.org.au/support, there are different tiers for different folks.
You can subscribe for as little as $25 for an under 18-year-old or a pet. Or if you want to be a bit more generous, get a bit more inner glow, which directly correlates to the amount of money you give 4ZZZ. You can subscribe for a full amount of $80, and if you're very passionate, $140. And then the super sub, the full $500, you get 100% inner glow. And you get your name on the wall downstairs, so you're part of the inner glow. Yeah. But yes, this is a community radio station. There is no stress, no pressure to, of course. We will still be here every week. Yeah. For your listening pleasure. Exactly. we manifest that warm inner glow for you. It's the power of collective consciousness. It is. And we might dive into, you've had some
info for us?
Yeah, I've got some stuff. So this is about how different, I guess, animals in Australia are able to combat heat because it's hot around here in Australia, hot and humid. So the first place I want to start off with is talking about metabolic rates. Now,
Ooh.
a metabolic rate, what the hell is that? So that refers to things such as your breathing, digestion, heartbeat, just all of those functions that your body does automatically to keep you alive. So it's all the stuff that is
You don't really think about
out of
do you?
sight, out of mind.
Yeah. But if it doesn't work, then you definitely
Actually,
notice.
now that I think about it, you're manually breathing. So,
Zack.
but yeah, these functions produce heat. So the lower the metabolic rate is, the body produces less heat, obviously. So if the external environment is getting too hot, having a lower metabolic rate lowers the amount of the heat the body produces, and therefore you can be cooler if your heart isn't beating so rapidly, if you're not breathing as much. It's literally keeps you cooler than if you were, I don't know, panting all the time. Not panting, I should say. Panting is actually used for a cooling thing, which we'll get to later. But if you're like not digesting, that sort of thing. So therefore, it can kind of be assumed that having a comparatively low metabolic rate can be beneficial in hot environments. So now that we're talking about this, we need to talk about ectothermic invertebrates and endothermic vertebrates. So ectothermic is where the outside temperature determines the temperature of the organism's body. So things like reptile, fish, amphibians, where it's like if it's cold, they're not moving around so much. If it's hot, they're a lot more active. And then you've got endotherms, which are us and birds, and that is essentially where the body has a lot more of a constant, stable temperature. It's not influenced by the outside environment as much. So with the ectotherms, since the external environment determines internal temperature, this directly affects their metabolic rate. And generally this is pretty good, right? Because when it gets hotter, when it gets warmer, these guys are more active, they can go and searching for more food, that sort of thing. But there is a threshold to the point where the body temperature will get too high, and it's sort of like it's not an optimal range for them to be in. So they get too hot, and that's when they'll start to seek cooling measures. And this is why the proportion of reptiles in the desert is quite high comparatively. It's because they, I don't know, they're more active, that sort of thing. They have more specializations in place that allow them to live in the desert, so they've got that scaly skin. They're not as prone to desiccation as they are as mammals or birds. And this is why they also decrease the further the temperature decreases. So I think there's only like 3 species of snake in Tasmania, for example, versus if you look at around Brisbane, there's like 50, just as an example. So as the lower in the latitude you get, the colder it gets, the less reptiles are, they can't be as active. And then the inverse is why we don't find mammals living in the desert. And if they are found in the desert, they have to have specific adaptations, like they're generally quite small, and they are typically nocturnal as well, because operating during the middle of the desert for a mammal, they will dry out very, very quick. They will lose water very, very quickly, and avoiding the hottest time of the day allows them to maintain that water, not overheat as likely, that sort of thing. And then these endotherms are all the mammals and birds, that is, they're better in cold environments as well. Because they've got fur, that sort of thing, their constant body temperature means that they're not going to be losing as much heat to the outside environment, and they also can be more active during it.
Sorry, I was flicking through articles that I was going to talk about today, and one that came related to lizards and particularly their ability to forage, especially where it's becoming too hot to forage.
Right.
And this one I can ask you about the QS ranking if you would like.
Yes, please.
This study was released in Science from the University of Melbourne QS ranking.
Oh,
It's pretty high.
Pretty high, or do you mean pretty low?
Well, if number 1 is the top.
Okay. I would say 19.
Oh, close. 13.
Oh,
University
that was,
of Melbourne.
Ooh,
Yeah, really
impressive,
close.
Yeah.
But they found that desert lizards were facing a, quote, cost of living squeeze as global temperatures continue to rise, which is cost of living directly related to body temperature, as you said, dictates how much food it needs and whether it needs to go outside. Desert lizards are especially challenged because food is sparse and it's often too hot to forage. So they lead author and University of Melbourne researcher Dr. Christoph Wild says climate warming is affecting species differently based on how they forage. And I think it was really just off the top of the dome. I was like, that's exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah.
How as deserts heat up, day active lizards face a squeeze, needing more food whilst having less time to find it.
Yeah, there's that trade-off with it where since their metabolic rates increase because of the higher temperature, they're burning up energy more quickly, but then if it's not optimal to go out and search for food, they can't get that energy.
Yeah, and they said on the other hand, nocturnal lizards may benefit from warmer nights that allow more hunting time. So it's really interesting already kind of seeing this kind of shift in the playing field in the balance, maybe. Yeah.
And I was going to say something as well about the nocturnal environment. I can't. Oh, yeah, it gets quite cold in the desert at night.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Interesting.
that's interesting. And then going back into a more endothermic animal. So we've got the northern hairy-nosed wombat. Now, they're quite like a large animal, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're super compact as well.
Dense.
They're super dense, yeah. But they're quite large, and they are surviving in a pretty hot environment out in Western Queensland around the Stanthorpe, St. George area, I believe, on the border. Further west than Stanthorpe, excuse me. But these have one of the slowest metabolic rates of any mammal or marsupial.
Well,
So they don't have to go out and forage that much, and when they do, it's nocturnal.
oh, cool.
Good for them.
Nice.
But then you compare that to a different mammal, that of the kangaroo. They're active during the day. They're quite large. So how do they cope? How do they cope with running around? They don't run around. They hop around, hopping around during the middle of the day in very hot conditions. So they can sweat, but only when they're hopping.
Whoa.
Which is...
That's pretty sick.
Yeah. And this is because the sweat glands are only active when they're hopping, and it prevents excessive water loss when they're not hopping around. So they don't need to be as cool when they're just sitting around doing nothing. So there you go.
Interesting.
They also do panting. So panting works because you've got moisture in your mouth, and that evaporates and cools you off that way. And they also lick their forearms. Again, evaporation-related thing.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Not just for fun.
I suspect it would be pretty fun too. Not that I lick my forearms regularly. So then we go into the echidna. Echidna, they blow snot bubbles.
Oh my god.
See, it's not...
Like an anime character.
I was going to say it's cute when they do it, but not me, apparently.
Jesus.
So the bubbles burst on their snout, and then, again, this evaporates and cools them off that way. And I was reading an article that said they found a 10-degree difference between the snout and other parts of the body, which is very noticeable. Also, they do belly flops. So the little echidna will go and press up the insides of its legs and its belly on cooler surfaces and cool off a bit that way.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Then you've got the crocodiles. The crocodiles, they do panting as well. It's pretty similar
Like
to...
a dog?
Yeah, kind of similar to dog, but they do this thing called mouth gaping, where they just leave their mouth open.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah.
They're cooling off. And that behaviour may also be seen in other reptiles, so like your lizards and that sort of thing. And then talking about another reptile, we've got the thorny devil. This one's super cool. It has specific grooves along their spiky back, and these grooves act as channels which directs water into their mouth directly.
Whoa.
So what they will do is they will go up and rub against dew in the morning, and this dew collects on the skin. It gets funneled into those grooves and then straight into the mouth, which is super nifty.
That is very cool.
It's like having a bit of a, not a river system, but like a
literal channel straight into
canals,
your mouth.
Those are my cute little animal things.
That is cool as hell. Thank you, Zack.
I was doing some research. I was trying to find some research on Murray cod and see if they had any heat responses, because my thinking was it'd be interesting to see them fish, but even though they obviously live in water, the Murray cod is found in locations that are the rivers tend to dry out a fair bit, so they tend to just get into a collection of large puddles essentially, and some of these puddles aren't necessarily deep, so they're quite shallow, and that water would actually get pretty warm. So I'm guessing they would have some specific adaptations to be living in that hot water. So if you're a scientist out there,
take us in.
Research that. I couldn't find anything on it.
There's a gap in the research field, is there?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't think anyone's going to want to fund that research, but
so.
I can still hope for it.
Yeah, 100%.
You're listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future.
You are listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future. Thank you, small child.
Let's go.
Hey, we got there.
That's hot.
Yeah, that's not the only thing that's heat.
Yep, nice.
What are we talking about next, Issy?
I'm going to talk a little bit about, Sweltering Cities as a whole, the organisation that is behind Extreme Heat Awareness Day, and how you can get involved. They have a variety of campaigns. One of my favourites was the Busted bus stops, where they highlighted how a lot of bus stops around Australia just don't have shelter on them, and it included this really interesting picture of people taking thermometers, the not wireless, but the laser-based ones, and taking a temperature of the footpath, and it exceeding 38 plus degrees. So really interesting campaign. So if you would like to get involved, swelteringcities.org is the organisation that we have worked with for today. So there is a variety of different things, like cool plans for hot suburbs, heatwave safe homes for renters as well, and payments not penalties for Centrelink. They're also doing a really interesting campaign about people getting cut off Centrelink payments during heat waves. And there's a really interesting Guardian article to go alongside it. So if this sounds interesting for you, please talk to them. Talk to also the variety of organisations that they also support as well. So like I said earlier, just being aware of that there is organisations that are taking care of you and your community. And yeah, I think that was my little yap all over.
I think I remember seeing something as well from them, that they recorded the temperature of the road surface in Western Sydney. One was without being underneath the tree, and the other one was underneath the tree with a bit of shade. It was about 20-degree difference. It was 50 versus 30, just off the tarmac. So very, very warm on the road there. But we need more trees around our concrete is what I think that suggests.
Yeah, I'm also going to share I asked the Eco Radio team in our group chat about how they cope with heat hazards, and Dave, always coming in strong, would recommend stop using fossil fuels and over-consuming so our friends in the future can have a chance to not be killed during regular heat waves. Andrew Barlett said trees and foliage in general, then more trees and foliage, especially in cities. He also suggested that surely there is a way to not have black bitumen on roads, some nice cooler colour like lilac. Apparently there's some reason, but I can't remember. I also would like to see that. I also know there is a study floating around. I'm not sure it's Brisbane specific, but if you have a look around Brisbane City, you can see quite a distinct style in buildings. Some of them the skyrise focuses more on that full glass enclosure, whilst the older buildings, your very 60s, 70s, have a mix of concrete and glass. And those full glass skyscrapers do increase the temperature down on the streets because of the sun reflecting back down onto the tarmac on the road. So even something like that, the skyline that you wouldn't even consider, plays a role in temperatures as well. Plus, I always think they just look better when they're a little older.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should also paint the road rainbow coloured, because I know that will upset a huge... I know that will upset a demographic that I want to upset. The whole, I won't go any further.
No, that's real. Andrew also said, apart from the obvious like aircon and water, I think not getting hot in the first place, especially staying out of direct sunlight at all times, it can be dangerous for some people, like older people, to walk across most pedestrian bridges in the daytime because they have such poor shading. Once you get seriously hot, it's harder to cool down even when you do find shade. Finally, Wavy said, leave the city, ? Decentralization. And I think that's all quite fair suggestions as well. What do you do, Zach? Because I'm also aware that you're in a rental.
I just deal with it.
You just deal with it?
Yeah.
I know you spend a lot of time in libraries.
Sometimes.
That might be. I know a lot of folk have been spending more times in those kind of third spaces with aircon. I'm pretty sure Emma Bacon brought that up last year when we interviewed her.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, spending time in other areas or houses that have aircon. I know I'm someone who's very routinely late to places, so I will sometimes show up early just to sit in the aircon. But we should probably jump into the Bushcare Roundup as well.
Yeah, we'll play our little
sing.
Dave's little tune.
It's a Bushcare Roundup. They've been pulling out weeds and then they put in trees. It's a Bushcare Roundup.
We've got a lot of bushcare related events and also general outdoorsy sort of things over the next week. I want to put together as many as possible so everyone knows the full suite of what they could attend. So on Thursday the 6th, we've got from 8:30 till 9:30 a.m. the Rocky Shore Sea Slug Survey at John Laws Park, Burleigh Heads. Then on Friday the 7th, from 7 till 10 p.m, we have the Friday night cane toad catching at 55 Burlington Terrace, Springfield Lakes. On
Saturday the 8th at 7 a.m, there's the Mookin-Bah Bushcare Working Bee at 106 Greencamp Road, Wakerley. At 8, there's the Wakerley. At 8, there is the Brisbane Food Growers Meetup at 1042 Brunswick Street in New Farm. At 8 a.m, Bushcare at Moore Park, Indooroopilly. At 9 a.m, the Beaudesert Biosecurity Awareness Workshop at 1 Sully Street in Beaudesert. At 4, there is the Coochie Curlew Count at Elizabeth Street in Coochie Mudlow Island.
That's Coochie Mudlow Island. There wasn't any insinuation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And at 6:30, there is Find a Frog in February. That's so cute. At Habitat Springs in Springfield Lakes.
On Sunday the 9th at 7 a.m, we have the Brandon Road Bushcare Working Bee at 140 Brandon Road, Runcorn. From 8 till 10 a.m, there is the Caring for Your Creek Working Bee at Platypus Park, Mount Crosby. From 11 till 2 p.m, we have the Forest Family Sundays at Theka, 47 Fleming Road, Chapel Hill. On Tuesday the 11th, from 2 till 3, we have another Sea Slug survey in the Rocky Shore, and that one's at John Laws Park, Burleigh Heads.
On Wednesday the 12th at 7:30, there is the Success Street Bushcare at the corner of Success Street and Beatty Road in Acacia Ridge. Finally, at 8 a.m, there is the robust Oyster Recycling Working Bee at the Port of Brisbane Park in Wimbrell Street, Port of Brisbane.
I want to clarify with that last one because it's a bit difficult to capture in a few words. Essentially what they do is that like the food industry, like when they're shucking oysters, that sort of thing, they discard the shells. These guys will put them back into little baskets and then they will be thrown back out into the middle of the ocean, and it's used for habitat for fish.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So that's that's really interesting.
Yeah, so that
variety
again,
of things.
Difficult to capture in a few words.
Yeah.
So it's best off explaining.
Bit
like
of a
that.
process, yeah.
But
nice.
that's it for Eco Radio this week.
Yeah, I hope that you've all enjoyed it. Please be heat aware as we are in the cooler months now, but check in with a family member, check in with your pets, check in with people that you may not be totally familiar with, because you never know when someone is affected. Be kind to yourself. Attend some bushcare, and we'll see you all next week.
But obviously, if you're attending bushcare, stay hydrated.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And wear gloves.
And PPE. Other avenues of keeping.
And give someone a kiss on the head.